multitasking, then I certainly would not be able to manage as many screens as I have in front of me.
Fair enough. Well, I have six screens. I have six screens.
Yeah, I don't know how your brain
Wait,
functions.
did I show you my six screens?
You did, and they're not even,
Oh,
so
okay.
please don't show them to me again
Okay,
unless you've
that's fine.
like
All right.
legit brought on a
Okay.
level. So Mr. Alex Silkin, I have your little card up here. Your memo that is, I would say, very much partially finished. But unlike the live streams that I've done previously, where I'm basically like kind of coming up with the best possible explanation of you, we had a little bit of a different project in mind relating to events and systemization for events and formats for events and just generally gathering people.
Yeah.
Well, sweet. All right. Questions before we jump in, or would you like to jump into my notes on events and experiences?
Questions? What are the questions?
Questions about life, the universe, and everything.
Oh, that's pretty deep.
I know, right? Okay, so we met at Art of Tech, which was
Mhm.
kind of like what like if you explain it to your I always try and explain things to like my parents, but like um it was it wasn't entirely art. It was a little bit of art and a little bit of like a VR tasting and then kind of like a networking event. It was kind of like a bunch of different components that were like together. Um and
I mean,
then
every time I've gone to those things, they've kind of had a lot of the similar stuff. There's a lot of
mm,
crossover into the hallucinogenic, kind of spiritual, kind of uh, meditative almost experiences with a lot of like fractals where you're like flying through space. There's like a lot of those kind of experiences. Um, there's there's I feel like a lot of just amateur people who are just kind of throwing stuff at the wall in
yeah,
VR, like just
my my
throwing a bunch of like assets within like a scene, and then being like, "Oh, this is art," and then pretty often it's you know, as someone who actually like works and has to release stuff that's polished, it can be pretty crude, but
I my favorite representation of that is QR because I'm a marketer, so QR codes.
yeah.
And someone's like, check out my new business card. It has a QR code on it. And then someone's like, oh, that's awesome. What did they do? And I was like, I don't know. I'm using it. And I feel
Mm,
like VR for the sake of VR, or I mean anything for the sake of anything,
yeah.
where there's no like intention behind it. Um, it's present in the space, but it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, there's also a lot of the AR stuff now. That's where there's like a traditional kind of interesting piece, and then you look at it in your phone, and it augments the art piece and lets
Hmm.
you. I think those are like really cool. Even though on one hand, it's why do you need then the traditional piece if you're just looking at it through your phone?
Right.
Although it is being used to actually you know for the tracking or
I,
whatever.
well,
Uh,
I was gonna say the second thing we went to had that, and that was the first time I had used it, and it was
mhm.
like the video was moving by itself, and all I had to do was move around the piece, but it didn't change the piece. So I could like change my perspective of it, but it didn't really change the perspective,
Mhm. Um,
which I think was in this video.
no,
So that was the first one, and then you invited me to this Cloud City thing, which had a
yeah,
really awesome graphic and was at the top of the Bank of America building, and was like that for me was a lot because it was it was a VR art thing, and then like demos of VR, and then a silent disco, and then a live performance, and then a sound bath, and then like a bar, and people were like kind of talking amongst each other amidst all of that. And, like there were so many levels of just engagement. It was even for me, it was pretty overwhelming. Like I'm used to like levels, but that was a lot.
yeah. Those insane amount of things all happened. I mean, there was also still the actual venue where you could go out and look at the
Yeah.
city. Although it was Quran, that was literally in the clouds that day because of the weather.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it if there weren't clouds, if people would have taken off their headphones more. I just the girl that first approached me, Tim's fiance, I forgot her name. Um, she had her like one headphone off, and I'm like, wait, so you're listening to music in a digital space with other people while you're having a conversation with me in a physical space? I was like, I can't keep up with that.
I mean, I was doing that too. I was definitely enjoying
I
music.
tried. I really tried,
Um,
and I was stone cold sober for that, and I was still struggling.
mhm.
Um, and then you invited me to something that I couldn't go to, and then I was on the email list of the people who put that on, which then led to me going to this thing, which was Inner Space, which was see if I can play the video. It was like a cannabis tasting thing that was inside this art dome. Um, that was pretty. I've been to the art dome before. It was pretty cool, but like the entire event was the space. Like they brought a little bit of value to the space, but largely it was the event was access to that particular space.
Yeah, the Wisdom. I've been there before for the Samskara exhibit. Um, they have the what was it, the microdose VR experience? I don't know if you tried that.
Mm. I think I
Um,
tried that at VRLA.
yeah, it's very much like a return to Burning Man kind of experience. Um, but it's really not friendly for new time VR users because you're using like joystick locomotion essentially to fly around, which is like very sickening.
Mm.
Like my friend who I put in, it was like her first VR experience. She was like kind of falling over as a result of that. Um, but the dome itself was like I've had a experience going to like a smaller dome before, and yeah, it's the big dome was just a completely just mind blowing experience in comparison. Um,
Yeah, they had a few bands going through, and it was immersive. That was yeah, multi-sensory narrative journey through consciousness. That's what
mhm,
sold me.
mhm.
And the last one, which I couldn't go to, was the lessons learned from the VR wave, which is a totally different range, which is where
Oh,
you were on a panel.
I actually did. Yeah, I did still buy that. Hmm.
So we've got like immersive experiences, which I would say inner space kind of was, sky space kind of was, and then away from immersive experiences, we have like I would call it a gathering where like people show up in a space and kind of talk to each other, which is more art of tech. But what you and I started talking about was like, okay, what can we do on a reasonably consistent basis with some kind of like a format that's not this huge production, but is still an engaging experience.
So, sort of like a weekly, monthly social event that's
Yeah.
infused with virtual reality
I mean, infused with any kind of
or any kind of entertainment.
yeah. Well, and Symposium, which you've been to a few times,
Yeah.
is I always get a kick out of the definition. Um, it's it translates literally meaning drink together. Was the
Hmm.
centerpiece of life in ancient Greece. Uh, where is it? Oh, I don't have it in here. It was so Symposium was the time after a meal, where there was essentially drinking, entertainment, philosophical discussions, like, and the list
Hmm.
goes on. But essentially, it was the time after a meal where wine was involved.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's the reason I chose it is because it's a loose format and it's a funny designation. Um, but at the same time, like I've found that a 2 to 3 word prompt of like this is what we're going to talk about helps. Having a featured speaker on that helps, but I would love to
Yeah.
have like a performer or like some physical object for people to play with that's like along those lines.
Hmm.
Um, like my it's across my room, but my massage gun thing I bring, it has nothing to do with anything that we ever talk about, but like handing someone who thinks that they're going to like a semi-professional meetup thing and handing them a massage gun, that makes for some interesting conversations. So what do you? I mean, like, what draws you when it comes to events?
Um, what draws me? Um, I definitely. I mean, for me, I guess the primary usually motivator is to I want to go there and meet people, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I do want to see cool stuff, but that's like the second um kind of a second priority. And that's I think one of the big problems right now with like VR. It's often very like isolating, and the experiences are often very much kind of focused on the person, and there's just not that much interaction with the people who are outside of VR, who are often just waiting. Um, if that makes sense.
It
Or there's just
does.
not enough like well, I don't think I've ever actually seen a multiplayer experience at any of these events that I go to.
Hmm.
Like all our games, for example, that we make are multiplayer because we target the arcade market, the VR arcade market, and no one goes to a VR arcade by themselves,
Yeah.
and no one really goes to these events by themselves. They go there already with existing friends, and they also want to meet new people and interact with them. And it's like I think like one of my biggest problems is like all these like cool trippy VR experiences. They're they're cool, but then you're just kind of like after like a few. For me, once again, maybe I'm just talking about myself. For me personally, often I start to feel like I am actually like losing out on a lot of the like social aspects by just
Hmm.
blocking myself off and experiencing this thing. Um, if that makes sense. I think
It
that's why
does.
that like the AR art is really cool because it pulls multiple people in, and multiple people can experience it at the same time and look at it. And if you go to, have you ever been to Two Bit Circus?
Well, so I was just going to bring that up is because the first
Yeah.
time I played with their games was at the Servius E3
Ah,
after party. And
yeah,
it got, and it was like the first debut of them, and it got really competitive really fast.
yeah. So you should definitely check out the actual venue
Yeah. I've
because
been waiting
it's
for
done very
a
well.
date worthy of that adventure.
It's done very, very well. They're adding still new games, and the games are all designed around socializing with your existing friends and hopefully maybe even like making new friends.
Hmm.
Although the latter, I haven't personally. I mean, I've only been to Two Bit Circus twice, and I haven't found the latter to be that effective. Um,
Hmm.
be- because the games are often really like pretty damn competitive, and
Yeah.
um, you're not really talking to people there, and um, because you're just trying to like survive and win.
Right.
I think that's where it comes down to well, once again, just speaking from our arcade game experience, all the games that we realize what works best in arcades is cooperative experiences, not competitive experiences.
Hmm.
People go there together with friends. They want to experience things together, especially if they're going on a date. They're not going there to you know, duke it out in death match. Like who will headshot who, like how many times? Like that's not going to be a very successful date if you just go and destroy your date
or
like
a
with
successful
like a
relationship either.
yeah. Like you want to so for me, uh personally, like the best example still, which once again, this is all my experiences, all my opinions, and
Hmm.
also I, as someone who works in VR, I just don't really play enough VR. I try to play as much VR as possible, and I think that's actually a common problem with for anyone, even just working in games or even other mediums. You become so busy, you barely actually experience the
Well,
medium. But
I mean,
I haven't I
speaking
haven't
of
tried
busy,
everything,
yeah.
but sorry, I haven't tried
Okay.
everything. But Coco's that Disney cartoon. They made an exclusive experience for Oculus Rift, Coco's VR, whatever Coco VR. Yeah, and you can experience it with another person. It's not really a game. The closest I felt to being like in this magical
Hmm.
Disneyland ride with another person, and I could totally see experiencing that with strangers and actually becoming like progressing the relationship, like knowing them, or just I think if someone was like, okay, I want to take someone on a VR date, I would say right now this is the one game that I think would be the first game that I would recommend.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, there's
So
other games. So, yeah, sorry.
so boiling it down, I mean, it sounds like taking people and putting them in the same space, giving them a cooperative goal that
But
is
this
not
this
too crucially life and death that you're
this
so
game doesn't even
focused.
really. Well, that's the thing. This is like technically, I don't even know if you want to call it a game. It's more of an experience. I mean, the goal is to get to the end, but it's like you can just go and just run to the end, or you can explore all these side rooms. It's really just like a world for you to explore,
And you're
right,
doing
with
it with
another
someone
person.
else.
And yeah, it's just like the more time you put in it, the more you see in it. But it's interactive. You can kind of interact with the other person. You can do all these social things like take pictures together, like selfies or whatever. You know, you dress yourselves up. Yeah, it's
That's
so
pretty awesome. So I brought this up a minute ago. Is this mixer thing that I'm going to tomorrow?
uh,
Which is like it's like the standard business mixer, right? Like everybody's showing up. It's a happy hour. There's an open
I,
bar. Like there's
have, have you been to many of these?
I've been to a few. Part of the reason why I'm going, and you'll get a kick out of this, if you can see it on my camera. So I bought a
Uh,
label maker.
uh, okay,
Um,
it's very tiny on my screen,
yeah,
so
so
but
I
okay,
bought a label maker,
yep,
and it is attached to a carabiner, which I carry on my belt, and
okay,
I have all of my website domains that go to like various
okay,
projects programmed as presets.
okay,
So it's like an instant print business card.
okay.
And I've taken it to one extremely fancy like opening party event, and it was extremely hilarious. And I've been carrying it around with me ever since, and it's continued to be hilarious. So I personally am going to this event that I would designate as like kind of bland and vanilla because I want to fuck with it. Like, like
the most once you get down to it, that's like what every human motivation for anything is, right? They want to fuck with something.
Yeah, I mean, you're like you wanna toy with the universe or whatever
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So, but this event series has been going on since I was in LA, and I it's been going for a really long time. I've heard some stories about like the organizers, but this is
Is
probably
it
like the.
good? Like,
I mean, so
I'm
but
just very sorry. Keep going.
well, okay, so the format of it is like almost non-existent, right? It's like people show up at a given space, there's alcohol and name tags, and that's pretty much it. And so what happens is largely up to chance, right? Because it's like you don't know who's going to be there. It could be people that you know because it's a small community. There's going to be a ton of people you don't know. Who goes to a networking event? Usually people that like want something, like they're trying to sell business. So you get a lot of people that are like instantaneously pitching their shit. Um,
Hmm.
and so I do it more as like I treat it more like Toastmasters, like as like a practice in public speaking,
Hmm.
or just like testing out like a random thing like carrying a label maker around on my belt.
Oh,
Um, oh, by the way, as of this morning, I am the proud owner of the domain Brian.bot.
mm,
I'm gonna get a hat, and then I'm progressively trying to ascend to the cloud, but that's a different live stream.
mm,
Um, so I mean, I think like between the two, right? Like, there's this kind of dry. We provide you a space with no intent or purpose, because it's kind of like you make your own intent and purpose, and then you
mhm,
have more of the like curated multi-sensory narrative journey through consciousness, which I think that was a prompt going into it, but I didn't see any narrative at the actual event itself.
mhm,
It was just kind of like we're going to put you present in the space with a shared experience. So I would say that's like the second level. And then I would say the
mhm,
third level is more of like a guided experience, which I would attribute more to like a mastermind or something like Summit Series or the Bulletproof Biohacking Conference. Like, and usually those are longer because they have to immerse you. But I mean,
mhm,
my question is like, if you look at Summit Series or like Bulletproof Biohacking, because those two are recent, and you say, all right, well, what does an immersive experience have? Actually, I'll throw in another one. Last night I went to this, it was a men's group put on by a guy who has a consulting company called the Wolf Pack. He's like a leadership
Mm-hmm.
consultant, and it was invite only. You had to be invited by another group member, which I was. I was invited by someone who came to Symposium.
Mm-hmm.
You go to this dude's house in Venice. He has like this
Mm-hmm.
massive walls. It's like he's been in Venice for like 30 years. And you go in, he has this
Mm-hmm.
cool backyard with like a sunken fire pit. And it was like eight
Mm-hmm.
dudes sitting around a fire talking about like throwing their shame and guilt into the fire and just like being open and
Ah,
honest. And it was great. Like, and
okay.
you're sitting around a fire drinking tea and like talk. Like it was great.
Yeah.
He also acted as like a facilitator, so that was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
looking at like these bigger experiences and then breaking them down to their component parts, I think that one did a really great job of it because he was very clear on like you have to show up at this time with your person. The gates close at this time. They like rang a bell at 7:01 because that was their like they program people to be there on time, which I definitely need to do with Symposium. Um, and then he did like a pre-frame of here's why we're here, here's what we're doing, and then he kind of opened it up. So it was like some structure, but then a lot of openness. Um, and it I would say it facilitated intimacy really quickly, but obviously doesn't really work with a large group.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Have you ever gone to like those speed dating things? I'm not been to any of those
For
either. So
networking or for dating?
both, I guess. I don't know. I mean, speed dating is very
Dating,
structured,
yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I only went to one, and I was like, it's either going to be terrible and therefore a good story, or great and therefore a good story. And it was like
Yeah.
it was right in the middle. It was
Oh
neither. And I
no,
was just like, ah,
it's
yeah,
average.
it was average. That's the
We don't
worst.
ever want to be average.
No. Um, so yeah, I mean,
Well,
I'm looking at these like, I think like a cohesive story for like each of these with some imagery. Like, so story number one, imagery number two, and then it's just brand. I mean, like this one's put on by Moonjo. I can never say her last name. Moingo Events. Um, this one I actually don't know who's put on by Bender.
reality, visual reality.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
and then Inner Space was put on by Green. What's it called? Green LA or something like the can.
Green grass fed.
Yeah, grass fed. Uh,
Yeah,
Lessons Learned was put on by XRLA.
yeah. It's just a meetup. They're actually doing. We're trying to host a meetup. Their next one of their meetups at our office at the end of May,
Hmm.
which is it's going to be a panel.
What do you how do you think it's like the space that would get? I mean, for a VR event at Servios, like I would imagine that would get a decent attendance.
That's the hope, and also obviously like who's going to be at the panel, etc.
Yeah.
Um,
So there's really three pieces. There's like you have a flexible space, meaning that like it jumps between different spaces, and then you have a consistent format, or you have like you have to have consistent elements and inconsistent elements. So with XRLA, the consistent element is who's hosting the event and what the format is, because it's always a panel. Yeah.
yeah, it's essentially always a panel. Yeah.
Okay, so it's always a panel. It's
Well, I mean,
always
I
in a
think they
different
have
place.
social events too.
Hmm.
Um, but I think what they're mostly known for, or whatever you want to call it.
Or panels.
Yeah.
Um, you're making me because I mean, it's probably because I've been staring at it all day, but
Oh, what's going on? Love Death
uh,
Robots.
yeah. So the opener for Love, Death, and Robots, like
Yeah. What?
it's like three icons that summarize the episode, but they don't make sense
Yeah.
until you've seen the episode.
Oh,
Um,
I didn't even notice that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's like it's an iconography synopsis of the episode. So spoiler is that I'm stealing it for some like basically to explain my projects, which I had already been
Hmm.
doing the three icon thing. Um Now I'm just stealing the carousel aspect of it. Uh but yeah, I mean, I think if you have the consistency of like how you explain an inconsistent thing, then if you and I go to XRLA and say, "Hey, like we think we could bring people to an event like this. Would you be willing to facilitate?" And then we would do all of the storytelling and promotion. They would do all of the legwork to facilitate. And if we go to Moingo events, I